So, guys, I want to talk to you about something on my YouTube channel. Like, I do something called Tough Stories for. I got a lot of new subscribers, so I want to mention what Tough Stories is, where I do talk about things that have happened to me in my life, really. And part of it is just to make closure, because I did go to a therapist for a while, and his mentality was just, when you go through hard times, you just focus on success, really. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes there's things that happen to you that's bad. Like I've dealt with emotional abuse, domestic violence, sexual harassment, inappropriate behavior that happened to me from relatives. And then I was almost murdered by the police. I struggled with suicidal thoughts and depression. I don't suffer from those things anymore. But I was kind of told when I went through those times, like, you just ignore it and you focus on your success, really. And that's helpful, but that's also not helpful, because that also teaches what I've been through a lot in my life, which is emotional repression, where you don't process your feelings or process your trauma and build up from that. That it's very, very important to experience what you've gone through, acknowledge it while you're moving forward, or else you're going to live in a world where it's like my feelings don't matter. And that's kind of how I was raised, and that's kind of what my therapist was always taught me, which is that your results matter, not what you've been through. And that's bad, because it teaches that, when I get hurt or disrespected by people, or when people hurt me in the past, I just gotta grit my teeth and deal with it. And I think I'll do another video talking about my therapy issues and just why I left my therapist. And I also want to give advice from things I've been through. So with all that said, really, I do want to talk about the vacuum cleaner incident. And this is kind of a loaded thing, that when I was in middle school, so the story is, what happened was that when I was in middle school, that me and my brother were watching television, and my brother would always do things to me, like sometimes he would smack me and hit me to break my balls, really, or sometimes I would call him like a fat ass and other really hurtful things. Like, mostly I make fun of his weight, really, because at that time it was very politically incorrect culture. So calling somebody a fat ass, a fat bastard, a fat fuck was really normal in the late 90s, and that's never okay. I was misdiagnosed with autism, so some people have called me a retard, and I've been called a nigger many times in my life, and I've been called stupid, and I've had my parents call me a retard and stupid sometimes as well when I did foolish things, really. So obviously we all know that we should not be fat shaming people, we should not be mental health shaming people. It's not right. It was never right. And one part of this video is accountability, really. So I remember, my brother was tickling me, and I got angry because I was saying, hey, you don't put your hands on me. I don't like that. And then I also was saying something like, I do not like people trying to make me smile when I don't feel happy, because because during that time I was bullied a lot. I went through a bunch of domestic violence, and I went through just emotional abuse and other things like that. So what happened was that I had a small Louisville Slugger bat. It was like a miniature. So I took it and I whacked my brother in the head with it, because I was sick and tired of him just putting his hands on me. And there's two things about this that I want to talk about: why I did it, and then I also talk about why I was wrong. That's the important thing. That I did it for a couple of reasons. That, number one, there was an episode of The Simpsons where Homer moons Mr. Burns. And there's a scene where Mr. Burns gets mad because that ruined his birthday party. So there's a scene where a police officer takes a bat and whacks Homer across the head with it, while his pants was down. So I was thinking about that scene. So obviously that's not good when we watch cartoons and we get bad ideas, really. And then also too, that a few months before that happened, the incident happened with me and the bat, was that we had a baptism. And I'm going to do another episode about this, where my brother roughed me up, really, because I think I called him a fat ass and whatever, and then he just beat me up. And he was scratching my arm, and there were scars on my arms. And I remember my father coming into the room, seeing what happened, really, and then he just put my brother in he roughed up my brother, he grabbed him by his throat, and my brother had a big frown on his face, as my dad was holding him up by his throat. And then my dad just bent him over and put his arm behind his behind his back, really, and was kind of roughing him up a little bit. So part of me was just a little bit of payback, but also what happened during that was that my other father came in and just took our TV away, because he felt that it was always violence on television that was influencing us. And I felt kind of punished. Like I got my ass whooped by my brother, and then my parents would take away the TV thinking that we're violent children because of the television. And mind you, that I will also think about our part of this to talk about my relationship with my father, really. Like, I'm going to say Rick and Garrison, because I'm not going to give out their real names. So, with Garrison, South Park fan, with Garrison, one time he flipped over the dinner table. And then also he would always use a lot of very verbally abusive language. And he was always like really disrespectful. I know like one time I was talking to one of my relatives, and what Rick did was that I had a younger brother. So what Rick did was that he took my younger brother's pacifier, he grabbed my mouth and did this. And then he had a big laugh and said, "Oh, well, I thought you were your younger brother, really. I'm going to call him, Stewie, come up with a name like Stewie." Family Guy fan as well, really. So, you having a grown adult grabbing your jaw and be like, "Oh, I thought you were Stewie," and whatever. And my dad also had a thing for sexually harassing me. He would always like slap my butt, and other things like that. And my parents are also a gay couple, really. So it's kind of weird when your father is 40, he's a homosexual, and he's slapping your ass around like you're a girlfriend, really. And there's things like, like I was talking to one of my friends really about weird touches, really. So obviously, your parents giving you a back rub, or I was like in St. Louis like last week. So there were parents that were giving their children back rubs, or barely punching their back a little bit to kind of like, relax their muscles, because there were like a bunch of runs and track meets. I'm saying that if I had a kid, I wouldn't be doing that. There's some people who kiss their children on the lips, really. I would not do that to my kid. But we can all agree that slapping a kid on the butt at any point, especially when they're a teenager, is highly inappropriate. And it's almost like, what would happen if I work at a hospital, really? So what would happen if a hospital, if a 4-year-old adult did that to their kid and they're chuckling the same way in front of like hospital staff? That kid's not going to go home with that person's going to be put in jail, really. That is sexual harassment. And if the person's gay on top of that, then you have to say, "Oh, are you trying to get off on your son, really? Is there some Lolita things?" Never appropriate. So when I did it, I had anger from that, and I was also bullied a lot in middle school. So I had that feeling of like, what? I need to express my anger. I need to express my feelings, really. So, but on the other side, that's assault. On the other side, that's not okay in any way, really, because that's assault. You can kill somebody that way. And then the other thing too is that violence is not the best way to respond to violence, really. So, and then that's kind of what happened afterwards. So I remember my father, I'm seeing that Garrison. So he took the bat out of my hand and he threw it across the living room, and it almost hit my other dad, who was holding a 1-year-old kid. And my other dad was like, "What the fuck, Garrison? You almost hit me too, really." And then Garrison was like trashing the house. He was like flipping over tables. He was throwing kitchen knives. He was throwing like everything he could, really. He was like rampaging. And as I said, I don't forgive my father for that, because he was always about, when I'm angry, I'll just turn up the violence. I'll throw shit around. I'll be a destructive asshole, really. And he was saying things like, and then what he did was he grabbed a vacuum cleaner and he was swinging it around, really, saying like, "Okay, what we're gonna do is that everybody in the family is gonna, we're all gonna stand." He's like said, "Everybody but Byron, we're gonna stand in one straight line, and I'm gonna take this vacuum cleaner, I'm gonna crack it across his head, and we're all gonna have a big laugh, and Byron's gonna learn not to hit a family member." And he was like preparing to like whack me. And reminds you, this guy is like 40 years old. He weighs like 200 pounds, and he's about to crack me in the head with a vacuum cleaner. So what happened was a couple of things. He kicked me out of the house, really. So me and Rick just hung out in the streets of New York City for 1 or 2 hours. The neighbors actually knocked on the door, really. And what also happened was that before I walked out of the house, he's like, "Get this fucking asshole out of my house. fuck him and whatever. Garrison did a foul butt slap to me and said, whoops, I thought that hurt really. And I stared at him for a while, like, wow, get okay, gay man, you're slapping my ass. I almost kicked him in the nuts and said, like, okay, faggot, get your hands off me, faggot, because that was kind of how I was raised, because I was kind of raised with my parents putting their hands on me. I remember one time, like, Rick did something where he just did the Homer Simpson strangle. He was like, to me, and my neck was all red. And even if you're joking around, your teenage son, really, like, what's that really? You're strangling your son, So, and I'm proud that I'm sharing this with you guys, because that's what I kind of been through. But it's kind of like goes down to what I've said about like how it was for kids of the 90s, which was that children were treated exactly like slaves. You can smack a kid, you can choke a kid, you can slap them on the ass. If they have mental health issues, you can make fun of their autism, you can call them autistic, you can call them retard, you can do all these things really. That was the norm back then. Parents were angry, they could unload on their children. Children were like punching bags. Children were objects, and they had to kiss their parents' asses, really. I had to be grateful. Well, I'm happy I didn't do all any of that shit, really. So after that happened, my parent, like, after that happened, like, Garrison wanted me to leave the house, and then, Rick, he actually left with me, and we just hung out for a couple of hours, really. Did some grocery shopping. And I remember, like, Rick calling Garrison, and he was like saying, can we come back? He's like, and Garrison's like, I don't want that fucking asshole near my house. And Rick was saying, well, fuck you. And he even said something like, well, fuck you, Garrison. When we adopted them, you signed the paperwork, Byron's not even my fucking kid and everything like that, really. So even like, goes down to what I've said about parents just disrespecting their children. I think it's okay to disrespect their children. And I also think the other part of this is just like, the other thing is personal accountability, because we also have to understand too that sometimes when we do off the wall shit as kids, really, or things that really cross a lot of lines, or if we have a pattern of just bad and antisocial behavior like I've had, sometimes people are not always going to be the nicest to us. Sometimes they're not always going to be Mr. Rogers. Not everybody is Carl Winslow. There are times when people snap, really, and then we got to just say, hey, or they're saying things out of anger, really. But there are a lot of times, and I feel like this has been like my relationship with my parents, that there's really been no accountability on them for how they treated me. I do understand that, look, doing videos online talking about things that have happened in my past that they may or may not remember, it adds a level of hurt in our relationship. And also too, even like with with some of the issues I have now where I text my parents a lot and other things like that, it adds to a level of maybe like, there's just no point of respect that I'll ever get from them because of how I've kind of made my closure, and part of me making my closure is to just talk about these things. But also it kind of goes down to what I've said too, by working in a psych ward and other things like that, is in life you have to know how to control yourself, because you don't want people controlling you. And sometimes parents believe in, hey, you know what, you cross a line with being violent, I'm going to turn up the violence. And that's kind of how I felt, really. Or there are times the parents say, okay, I'm going to put you in a psych ward, or okay, I'm not going to, I care, or I want to understand why you did this. I want you to write like maybe 5 pages on what was going through your brain when you did that. And then we're going to dissect it and we're going to talk about it. But, and then I think that a little later on, after I'm done with this, I'm going to talk about what I would have done, because I think that's appropriate. So we came back to the house, and Garrison did one of those things too, where he just did something like, he did this to me. He did this, my child, and and I forgot what he said the whole conversation really, but he did say something along the lines of, you caused me to react that way, and other things like that. And I remember talking to my therapist, because I was seeing a therapist at the time about what happened, really, And then I brought those things up about him and the vacuum cleaner and other things like that. And they had a conversation, and then my parents were pissed at me that I shared all that. And they were saying, it's your fault that you made me do that. And that was kind of like how it really ended, really. So I do think that the first thing that I want to say is, hypothetically, what would I do if I had a child that did this? That I think the first thing that I would say is, number one, I do not plan to have children or pets because I grew up around domestic violence. So I think that also part of the generational trauma that I have is that I'm prone to anger. I'm prone to being disrespectful to children, really, because especially if I had kids, I'd probably be mean and disrespectful because that's how I was raised. Or maybe there's a sense of, well, I don't want you to have it better because I didn't have it better. So my first instinct is never to have children and never to have pets. If I were to have children, I would do a lot of thinking beforehand about how to process my feelings. If it was almost like, fate and God and whatever said you're going to have children for the next 18 years and you have to deal with it, I would have to get a lot of therapy and process some of my feelings and hypotheticals in my head of how I'm going to process if things like this happen, really. If I was completely in control of myself, probably if I was not in control of myself, I would probably want to whip my kid's ass for doing something like that, just to be like, you crossed the line and you're not going to get away with it. And I think that that's kind of parallel to what my dad was doing. He wanted to take as far as he could to say, you're not going to get away with it, because what's going to happen next of this, what's going to be, this crossed a huge line. What's the next huge line that you could cross? Is it killing somebody? Is it stabbing somebody? So I can kind of understand, why my parents did that. But if I was in control of myself, well, I would do a couple of things. First of all, if my kid did that, I would take the bat away from them. I would put them on the floor and I'll put them in a hold, like maybe their arm around their arm behind their back, like a chicken wing. And the reason why I would do that is I worked in a psych ward. They do that to psych patients. They do that to patients that are violent in a hospital. And the reason why I would do that is I would tell my kid, that's where you're going, really. Because in prison, that's what cops do to you when you fuck up like that. If you want to act like a prisoner, you do that. The next thing that I would do is that I would call psych work, would call whatever and say, hey, this happened and the kid needs to be removed for a while. But this is what I want done to my son, to my kid. I really want them to write, at least 10 pages on what was going through their head when they did this shit. And I think we need to sit down and talk about it. So that's how I would handle it. And if that happened to me, this is what I would write. Now, if my parents did that, if my parents made me write down why I did that to my brother, I would say this, that I did it because a few months ago when we had a baptism, Matt did all this shit to me, and then I felt like I was punished because the television was removed. I did all this shit. The reason why I hit Matt with a bat was because when I see, because my father, Garrison, had a pattern of very violent outbursts. So I feel like I'm so angry because I feel that I'm not allowed to cross lines, but everybody's allowed to cross the line. I deal with bullying. I deal with people hitting me. I deal with people spitting on me at school. I'm disgusted when I go to a school and I see a bunch of thugs and hood rats and other things like that wrestle and fight each other in classrooms. It's just nonstop anarchy. It's nonstop. Everybody's allowed to be violent and crazy, but you want to teach me to be like Rod and Todd Flanders from The Simpsons. Like I'm the only one who has to follow the law, really. As I said, I remember one time me and my brother were playing a video game, and I remember saying that ain't right, or something like that, really, or that's, or you didn't play the, or you ain't playing the game right, or whatever, really. My dad corrected my English, and I said whatever, and my dad got out of the shower with a bath towel on, and he raised his hand like, you know what, you used incorrect English, and you're questioning me. Like, that type of shit, really. You really think that it's appropriate for a man in their 40s to rush out of a shower with a bath towel on and threatening to smack their kid because they said the word ain't or wouldn't, couldn't, shouldn't? If you, like, as I said before, and I'll say it again, if you, sometimes you want your kid to have high standards in life, but sometimes they get mad because they're like, you know what, I'm the only person who has to be, I have to be Ron Todd Flanders. I have to be, straight and proper, really. I have to be like Chris from Everybody Hates Chris. I gotta be all proper when nobody else is proper, really. So, yeah, that kind of is painful. And it's also like what The Rock said, that sometimes when in life, when you're disrespected by people, the best way to fight that is to be respectful back, because you're being the better person. But sometimes there's no respect in being the better person when long term that helps you out, really. But I would talk about those things, really. But I think that if you really analyze it, it's two things. Like I've said this many times, two wrongs don't make a right. Just because you're going through a hard time, if you go through a hard time, you behave like an asshole or you behave like a criminal, you're an asshole or you're a criminal. Always do right, no matter what you do. And like I've always tell, like I worked in the psych ward, I clean a psych ward, but if I was one of the nurses and I could talk to the patients, and I would say this: you always have to know how to control yourself, because that's how life is. Life has advantages and disadvantages. People are born or adopted into situations that are challenging or not challenging. People go to school and sometimes it's a bad situation, sometimes it's a good situation. People are sometimes around consistent violence, and some people are not around consistent violence. Sometimes people are around consistent disrespect and emotional abuse, and sometimes people are not. But you always got to be in control of yourself, because sometimes that's how it works in life. Sometimes the wrongs you do stand out, but sometimes the wrongs other people do to you don't stand out. And like I said before, you have parents that on two separate occasions choked their children. You have parents that flip over tables. You have parents that throw and trash a house. You have parents that butt slap. You have parents that verbally abuse, and there's no sense of accountability. It's, you triggered me, I run wild with my feelings. It's understandable. It's understandable how crossing a line can lead to somebody exploding in anger. But a good parent and a right parent will be like, hey, I need to check myself. And if I am an example of violent and out of control behavior, that's what I'm teaching as well, really. It means that we're both wrong and we both have to be better people. It shouldn't be, well, you crossed the line, I crossed the line, it's your fault for making me cross the line. And that's what it is, really. I was wrong for what I did. They're wrong for what I did. I was wrong for what I did. They were wrong for how they responded to me. But, I'm the only one who walks with any form of accountability. But I also understand, too, that this was also a bad experience for me, because this happened to me in 6th grade. So I had to be 1999. So this had to be, when I was like 12 years old, really. So this is kind of like what led me down the path of a darker version of myself. Like I remember watching The Crow, like some clips of it, and feeling like I resonated with that character because I was hurting on the inside. I was very sad. I had a lot of anger, and I was around a lot of violence in school, violence at home, a lot of abuse, emotional abuse, and just a really dark, really dark soul, really. So I really felt that this was kind of like the nurturing of me becoming a darker and darker person. Like, like going from that innocence and happy and honestly being happy to just, like feeling like, what, darkness is my life. I got to embrace my darkness. I got to embrace looking at the world in a very nihilistic and dark way. This is one of these. The response was one of the things that turned me into a darker person, really, a darker soul. But I also would say that I also wrote a memoir. No, I wrote like a nonfiction. No, I wrote a fantasy book, and I had it so I would turn out to be an assassin character, and what turned my character into an assassin, what got him leaving his family and living on the streets of New York City and being taken in by a mobster, being trained to be a violent assassin, was this. So it's almost like, I almost had a it was interesting, like how when I wrote a book in my 20s, I made this like the instant or the incident that turned my character into being thrown out of the house, living on the streets, and turning into like a very badass assassin who's a mix of like a sword fighter and like a gunslinger, and also like a human wrecking ball, and somebody who abused drugs to kind of like gain like superhuman, like human wrecking ball powers, really. But it really was one of these things that one of the darkest moments of my entire life, really. But I understand like how my anger bred more anger, and that's kind of another thing. But also too, how is another example of what I was always taught: adults can cross lines, but children can't.